Leni Riefenstahl remains one of the most controversial figures in the history of cinema, a woman whose artistic brilliance is undeniable, yet whose legacy is inseparable from one of humanity's darkest chapters. This is the story of a filmmaker who revolutionized visual storytelling and the price of aligning creativity with tyranny. Helene Bertha Amalie Riefenstahl was born in Berlin in the year 1902. Before she ever touched a camera, she was a dancer, a rising star in Germany's vibrant arts scene. An injury ended her dance career, but it opened another door. She turned to acting, appearing in a series of mountain films, a popular German genre celebrating nature, heroism, and physical endurance. These films shaped her aesthetic, grand landscapes, idealized bodies, and a fascination with physical perfection, themes that would later take on a far more troubling significance. Riefenstahl was not content to remain in front of the lens. She studied filmmaking obsessively, learning editing, cinematography, and direction at a time when women rarely held such roles. Her first film, as a director, The Blue Light, released in the year 1932, showcased her talent for visual poetry, dramatic lighting, sweeping vistas, and a dreamlike atmosphere. It also caught the attention of a rising political figure, Adolf Hitler. Hitler admired Riefenstahl's work and saw in her the perfect artist to shape the visual identity of the Nazi movement. Riefenstahl accepted the invitation to film the Nuremberg Rally of 1934. The result was Triumph of the Will, a cinematic masterpiece in form and a propaganda weapon in function. The film pioneered techniques still used today: moving cameras, aerial shots, long telephoto lenses, and choreographed mass spectacle. It transformed political propaganda into an art form. But its purpose was clear: to glorify Hitler, to mythologize the Nazi Party, and to present dictatorship as destiny. Riefenstahl always insisted she was politically naïve. History suggests otherwise. In 1936, she directed Olympia, documenting the Berlin Olympic Games. This time, her artistry reached new heights. Slow motion, underwater photography, and dynamic tracking shots shaped sports cinematography for generations. The film celebrated athletic beauty, but it also served the regime's narrative of physical superiority. Even so, Olympia is widely regarded as one of the most influential documentaries ever made. This duality, innovation, and ideology defines Riefenstahl's legacy. As the Second World War unfolded, Riefenstahl's relationship with the Nazi leadership became impossible to ignore. She was present during invasions, filmed military operations, and benefited from the regime's resources. After the war, she was arrested multiple times, but never convicted of crimes. She maintained that she was an artist, not a propagandist. Yet her films had helped shape the image of a regime responsible for genocide. Her denials were met with skepticism, and her career never recovered. In later decades, Riefenstahl reinvented herself. She photographed the Nuba people of Sudan, producing striking images that once again showcased her eye for composition and human form. She even learned to scuba dive in her 70s, capturing underwater worlds with the same visual intensity that defined her early work. But the shadow of her past never left her. Every exhibition, every interview, every new project was haunted by the same question: can artistic genius be separated from moral responsibility? Leni Riefenstahl died in the year 2003 at the age of 101. Her legacy remains deeply contested. On one hand, she transformed cinema. Her innovations shaped documentary filmmaking, sports coverage, and visual propaganda. On the other, her work served a murderous ideology. Her artistry cannot be disentangled from the suffering it helped legitimize. Riefenstahl forces us to confront an uncomfortable truth. Talent does not exist in a vacuum. Art has power, and power always has consequences. Her story is not simply about a filmmaker. It is about the choices artists make, the systems they support, and the responsibility that comes with influence. History remembers her, not just for what she created, but for what her creations served.
The woman known to history as Helene Amelie Bertha Riefenstahl, or as she later became known, Leni Riefenstahl, was born on the 22nd of August 1902 in the dreary and drab industrial sector of Wedding in Berlin, Germany. Riefenstahl's father was Alfred Theodor Paul Riefenstahl, born in Brandenburg, Germany in 1878 to Amelie and Gustav Riefenstahl, who worked as a blacksmith. Alfred was tall, blonde and burly, often styling a Kaiser Wilhelm mustache. He described himself as a salesman, but in reality, he was a plumber who had come to Berlin in the pursuit of better economic possibilities. He owned a large heating and ventilation company, installing modern sanitation in the buildings of Berlin. Alfred was quick-tempered, and friends and relatives did not dare to contradict the man, as he had the final say on everything. Leni's mother was Bertha Ida Scherlach, described as a willowy beauty with dark eyes, curly dark hair, and a determined jawline. Bertha was the 18th child born to her family on the 9th of October 1880 in Wrocławek, Poland. But she would not know her mother, who died during childbirth. Her father would marry the nanny shortly after and have 3 more children, bringing the total to 21. And when Eastern Poland was annexed by aggressive Imperial Russia, the family moved to Berlin. The family had to live frugally, though, due to Bertha's father's inability to find work suitable for a man of his advanced age. The Riefenstahl family moved in 1906 to a large flat in Berlin-Neukölln, thanks to Alfred's growing business, with Leni's only sibling, Heinz, being born on the 5th of March 1906, and although they had moved, the new neighborhood was relatively similar to their old one and would be a source of contention in the next decade. Due to the family's increased wealth, they would be able to afford excursions to Rauchsfangswede, a village along Lake Zeuthen in the countryside, which was idyllic and green, and was far away from the dangers of city life, allowing the children to hike, swim, and watch the clouds go by. Bertha influenced Leni's love for the theatre at an early age, as they spent one Christmas in Berlin seeing the play Snow White, and all throughout the train ride home, she talked fanatically about the play, so much so that the other passengers begged her mother to shut her up. She wondered what went on behind the curtain, declaring it a mysterious world. This inquisitive nature often landed her into trouble at school, as she consistently received bad marks for interrupting her teacher to ask questions. She also received piano lessons, but never liked to play. Instead, she enjoyed swimming. However, the family's time in Neukölln would be short-lived, as they moved to Goldstrasse in 1916, then on to Yorkstrasse. Following her graduation from elementary school, she was signed up into a gymnasium by her father, who believed it was an important part of education for young German children. Latin and Greek courses bored Leni, but instead she blossomed into athletics. Riefenstahl was confirmed at Kaiser Wilhelm Memorial Church on Easter Sunday in 1918. And it was also in 1918 that Riefenstahl saw an ad for the Grimmreiterate School of Dance and attended an audition. She was accepted into the dance school, but could not fully enroll, despite the director's wishes. Instead, Leni had secret dance lessons, paid for by her mother, as her father would not have approved if he had found out. The Great War ended on the 11th of November 1918, following the capitulation of Germany, which saw the rise of communist revolutions all throughout the country. There was no Kaiser or king, but instead rose the feeble Weimar Republic. For Riefenstahl, however, the political events of the revolution held minor significance. She had a brief encounter with the revolutionary movement when she was caught in crossfire on a train between 2 opposing revolutionary forces. But besides this close encounter, ideas of nationalism, patriotism, and war were never to the forefront of her thoughts like many other youths of her age. The assassination of Karl Liebknecht and Rosa Luxemburg in early 1919 saw counter-revolutionary movements against the communist uprising and the removal of many left-wing politicians from office, and by 1922, over 500 left-wing politicians had been assassinated. In fact, political violence had become so widespread since the communist uprisings that most Germans had become numb to it. Riefenstahl's dance lessons were occasionally interrupted by gunfire, but she hardly ever paid attention. As she was focused on becoming the top dancer at the Grimm Reiterate, she was exposed to many stars while there, including Anita Berber, a former student at the dance academy. Berber was only 3 years older than Riefenstahl and already had an illustrious career, starring in films highlighting the dangers of drugs. Berber was due to dance with dancers from Grimm Reiterate on one occasion, but ultimately was unable to perform due to falling ill. Riefenstahl replaced her in the dance by mimicking dance routines Berber had prepared. Her substitution garnered her much attention, including from her father, who was furious with his daughter being linked to Berber, who led a scandalous life as she had not heeded her movie's own warnings, abusing drugs, and eventually contracting tuberculosis and dying at a young age. The discovery of Riefenstahl's dancing and the Berber scandal caused such a rift in the family that her father threatened to divorce her mother and send Leni to boarding school. Riefenstahl's rebellion against her father led him to believe Berlin had become the national sewer, which was also heading towards moral anarchy. Riefenstahl couldn't have cared less, as this behavior was normal for her father, but she would eventually quit her dance lessons and instead enrolled in Berlin's State School of Arts and Crafts to learn painting, which pleased her father. Yet Riefenstahl paid little attention to her studies, so her father enrolled her instead into the Lohmann School in Thale, situated in the Harz Mountains, ensuring there was no arts program at the school. Despite her father's attempts to pry her away from the arts, she found a way around it by packing her ballet slippers and practicing with her roommate Hella Gruhl. The two had a lot in common, as both had been sent away by their parents in the hope the countryside would break their children of the desires to take up the stage. Instead, her isolation allowed her to pursue her dream further, as she participated in plays by Goethe and Schiller in the town's outside theatre. And when Riefenstahl turned 19, she returned back to Berlin with the resolve to be completely independent and not depend on others. By 1923, inflation in Germany was out of control. One way a German could live comfortably among the economic turmoil was to have access to foreign cash. Riefenstahl was able to gain such access by meeting Heinrich Sokal, a Jewish banker from Innsbruck. Sokal had fallen for Riefenstahl and had agreed to finance her debut and try out for the dance industry. Riefenstahl decided she would make her first professional outing in Berlin, but the cost was increasing steeply. Sokal recommended she have the tryout closer to Innsbruck, and they decided to compromise and settle for Munich. On the 23rd of October, Riefenstahl held her first official tryout at Tonhalle, which was at the center of Munich. The venue was only filled to a third of its capacity for Riefenstahl, but it was still an impressive feat for an unknown dancer. Sokal paid for every aspect of her performance: the venue, the musicians, and even a large marketing campaign, both before and after her performance. He paid for critics to write reviews, and most were positive. And not long after her first public appearance in Munich, her dream of performing in Berlin came true, as on the 27th of October, she would perform for a full house at the Blüthner Saal. She viewed the tryout as a triumph beyond my wildest dreams, because it was now clear to her father that Riefenstahl had the talent to take her far in life. She finally had the approval from her father and the growing admiration of the public. Despite the economic turmoil, the theatre never took an economic hit like the rest of German society and was an active social venue. Whilst no new productions were produced, it was possible to allow those with no professional experience, such as Sokal, to showcase the talent Riefenstahl had to offer. It was only 2 weeks after Leni's first appearance in Berlin that the Weimar Republic stabilized its currency, allowing for German citizens to finally feel the economic weight lifted off their shoulders, and since the currency had now stabilized, this allowed the average German to easily attend the theatres, leaving the theatres scrambling to find talent, a situation which Riefenstahl was well positioned to take advantage of. Riefenstahl found herself on stage at Max Reinhardt's Deutsches Theater in Berlin, with the occasional appearance in a Kammerspiel, or silent film. On average, Riefenstahl earned between 500 and 1,000 marks, or $125 to $250 in US currency, allowing her to live a comfortable life in the 1920s. She had received job offers in the film industry, yet turned them down, in favor of focusing on her dancing career. Between October of 1923 and May of 1924, Riefenstahl performed 70 concerts across Germany, including in the major cities of Frankfurt, Leipzig, Cologne, Zurich, Dresden, and Prague. Unfortunately, during Riefenstahl's tour, she suffered an injury to her left knee during a performance. She visited numerous orthopedic doctors in several countries, with all of them encouraging rest, but in the end, her career had ended in Prague. But in June of 1924, Riefenstahl saw a poster for the movie Mountain of Destiny, which inspired her to take a trip to the countryside. Riefenstahl, Sokal, and Heinz, Riefenstahl's brother, all lodged at the fancy hotel Karasee, and while they were there, Louis Trenker, the star of Mountain of Destiny, appeared. Trenker showed the film, and in that moment, Riefenstahl exclaimed that she would star in Trenker's next film. Trenker told Riefenstahl that the director, Arnold Fanck, was staying in Berlin, and in typical Riefenstahl style, she instantly left for Berlin. Riefenstahl and Fanck would meet at Rumpelmeyer's pastry and coffee shop on the Kurfürstendamm, where she showed Fanck her photographs and dance reviews, and proclaimed she would star in his next film before leaving. Immediately after this, Riefenstahl went to have experimental reconstructive surgery on her knee that would either fully heal it or leave her paralyzed. When she woke up from the surgery, Fanck was there with his new script, The Holy Mountain, a continuation of the Alpine romance film genre. Meanwhile, Sokal discovered Fanck's filmmaking firm, Freiberg Mountain and Sport Film Company, was nearly bankrupt. And so, Sokal, who had wanted to get into the filmmaking industry, bought out the company. And potentially due to this deal, Riefenstahl took the lead part without an audition, with Trenker being given the lead role. The filming for The Holy Mountain was set for January, and Riefenstahl was relieved to know her surgery was a success. The plot of the film involved a love triangle between Riefenstahl's character, Diotima, and two villager best friends. Diotima is dancing at a luxury resort when the two best friends unknowingly both fall in love with her. Louis Trenker's character, the friend, and Vigo, the skier, fight for Diotima's love. During the climax of the film, the two are dangling from a cliff, attached to one another with a rope. The friend realizes he is unable to save Vigo, and unwilling to break the mountaineer code, the two fall to their death together, leaving Diotima heartbroken. The Holy Mountain proved a drastic change in Fanck's filmmaking career, as it was the first time a female was to be the main subject of the Alpine film genre. The Holy Mountain premiered on the 17th of December 1926 at the Palast am Zoo Theatre, and eventually the film reached England, France and the United States, propelling Fanck to international filmmaking stardom. Following the success of The Holy Mountain, Fanck created a new script for his new female star in the film A Winter's Tale. Though the new film was set to be produced, the parent company for Fanck, UFA, had become insecure about financing the film after the exit of Sokal, and looked for support before signing off on the financial aspect of the movie, since The Holy Mountain had run over budget. UFA would look towards Alfred Hugenberg, future chairman of the Nazi Party and finance minister during the early administration, who took control of the company in March 1927. Hugenberg's arrival brought much-needed funding to UFA, yet Hugenberg would not be their only connection to the Nazi Party, as General Erich Ludendorff and the other members of the German High Command had established UFA as a propaganda tool towards the end of the Great War in 1917. Yet with Hugenberg at the helm, he scrapped The Winter's Tale, forcing Fanck to quickly create a new film called The Great Leap, a ski comedy film starring Leni as Gita, the goat girl, a simple goat herder who falls in love with an acrobatic skier, Snowflake. It is suspected Leni's role in the film was a result of Fanck's jealousy and was used as revenge for Leni's toying with his emotions. During the shooting of The Holy Mountain, Leni had an affair with Trenker and made Fanck aware of it, knowing how Fanck felt about her. Trenker never fell for Leni, as she did for him, and the two constantly argued on set, leading to Trenker making comments to the media before the announcement of the newest film. Despite the drama, Leni took the role in her stride as she wanted to prove to both Trenker and Fanck that she could act in a comedy, despite having no training in it. The Great Leap was filmed for only 6 months and premiered on the 20th of December 1927 at the Palast am Zoo to lukewarm reviews. Riefenstahl starred in numerous other films, none of which garnered much support from the public, leading to Ufer to question whether Riefenstahl was actually star material. As her filming stock declined, along with Ufer's growing mistrust of Fank's writing and directing, Fank approached Sokal to convince him to fund his new film. Sokal agreed, and the two drew up the contract on a napkin, giving Riefenstahl the lead role. The new film was called The White Hell of Pitzpalu, and at the insistence of Riefenstahl, Fank was not the only director involved, as G.W. Pabst joined to help improve Fank's often one-dimensional filmmaking. As usual, a trio of characters were in the film, as a doctor who had lost his wife in an avalanche meets a honeymooning couple played by Riefenstahl and Ernst Peterson, who played as Vigo in The Holy Mountain. During the trio's climb, they encounter a storm and need to be saved, but when the couple is saved, the doctor stays behind to perish in the storm, near where his wife had died. The White Hell of Pitzpalu opened at the Palast am Zoo on the 15th of November 1929 and quickly rose to number 2 at the box office. It would be Fank's most successful film in his career and Riefenstahl's best acting picture. It garnered so much attention that Universal Studios, who originally rejected the film, changed course and showed it in America. Many critics wrote that Leni was finally convincing in her acting and had outgrown her previous roles and finally found her way in acting. Despite the success of the film, it never opened any new avenues for Riefenstahl, leaving her to remain with Fank and Sokal for 2 more films, both of which were mediocre at best. The innovation of sound in film travelled slowly from America across the world, and especially to Berlin, where the financial strain was hampering the ability to adapt to the new technology. For Germans, the use of the camera and its angles were more important than the use of sound in film, and as a result of sound, most cameras became immobilized, resulting in a loss of progress on cinematography. Whilst Riefenstahl's acting career was nearing its end, she set her sights on directing as the new path instead. She sketched a new movie, The Blue Light, in 1930, while on the set of a movie she was acting in, and later expanded the script while on another set in 1931. Riefenstahl's The Blue Light was different than typical films of the mountains, as unlike Fank's Vision, where he focused on the mountain themselves, Riefenstahl focused on the characters who lived around the mountain. The Blue Light was set back in time and used a fairy tale method of storytelling unlike other contemporary films. Riefenstahl's character Junta was a semi-wild woman who lived in the mountains, worshipping blue crystals, which illuminated the valley during the night. It was the only character Riefenstahl created for herself, and it was an escape from her typical empty-headed woman role. However, Riefenstahl ran into problems even before the filming started, as there were claims that she stole the idea from the book Rock Crystal, published in 1930 by Swiss author Gustav Renker. Fank knew of the book, and when Riefenstahl approached him to work with her on the film, she refused to acknowledge the existence of the novel. This led to him refusing to help with the project. Despite her refusal to acknowledge the similarities between Rock Crystal and the Blue Light, the creation of the character Junta was entirely down to Riefenstahl, and so with Fank's lack of support, she turned instead to Béla Balázs, a Hungarian film critic and theorist, to fill in the missing parts of the Riefenstahl script. She was unable to pay him for his time, and suggested he take part of the profit when the film was released, to which he agreed. But Riefenstahl was still without a cameraman, and so she approached Schneeberger with the same deal as Balázs, which he accepted along with many veterans of Fank's movies. Not only did she struggle to find support from her friends within the industry, but across the board she had issues. She approached every major and minor studio, but no one was willing to take on the financial aspect of the film, and so she created the Leni Riefenstahl studio film GmbH to give herself full licensing and creative control over the film, before approaching Sokal and his film company to enter into a partnership to finance the film. The filming for The Blue Light would finally begin in July of 1931, which showed the skill of Riefenstahl in bringing together a crew, despite heavy opposition from the film industry. The filming for the movie only took 3 months, but as a result of the low budget, the crew slept outside or in barns provided by the locals. The crew also had to hike to the filming locations, and most were almost impossible to get to in the San Valley. The problems were not only in the filming of the movie, but also in the editing of it, as most of Riefenstahl's editing skills were choppy and unnatural. When she approached Fank for help with the editing of the film, Fank changed everything, leaving Riefenstahl devastated, but by February 1932, the experience she had with Fank allowed Riefenstahl to see the movie she originally created was nothing more than a picture book. By learning from Fank, Riefenstahl learned how to cut and piece film together, and on the 24th of March 1932, The Blue Light premiered at Palast am Zoo. According to Riefenstahl, the movie was an undreamt-of success, a triumph beyond my wildest dreams, a sensation. Yet Sokal remembered it differently. The critics, who were deemed as the democratic papers, the ones considered Jewish, were harsh in their reviews. Meanwhile, the further right the papers were, the better the reviews. Riefenstahl was outraged over the terrible reviews and blurted out, "What do these Jewish critics understand about our mentality? They have no right to criticize our work." Riefenstahl's ego became more apparent as she completely ignored the only reason her filming career had become a reality was because Sokal financed her films and Balash offered his skills of writing and film theory. She ignored the Jewish people who influenced and shaped her work, falling in line with the growing rise of the Nazi Party. Riefenstahl disputed the claim by Sokal that she made such an outburst, but on the 3rd of November 1932, she had a similar fit during an interview with Rudolf Arnheim, in which she said, "As long as the Jews are film critics, I'll never have success. But watch out, when Hitler takes the rudder, everything will change." The Blue Light would be re-released, with the contribution of the Jewish workers completely erased from the film's credits. Besides the credit being fully given to Riefenstahl, the blame for the film not being a box office success would be given to the Jewish people. When the Nazi Party was rising in popularity rapidly among the public in 1932, Riefenstahl was still within her own world. She hardly paid attention to the political environment as her entire life had been consumed by the film industry. But despite her busy lifestyle, she did know about Hitler's rise to prominence, as between the filming and premiere of The Blue Light, she attended a Nazi rally in Berlin's Sportpalast. Riefenstahl recounted the first time she saw Hitler as like being struck with lightning. Hitler's vision for the new Germany had opened Riefenstahl's eyes to the possibility of the future, and before starting her new film, SOS Iceberg, she wrote to Hitler asking to meet him. One day before the press release and her scheduled date to leave for filmmaking, Wilhelm Bruckner, Hitler's adjutant, called Riefenstahl inviting her to meet with Hitler. Riefenstahl gleefully accepted, but she was also expected to meet the crew to leave for filming. She boarded a train for Wilhelmshaven. Following her arrival in Wilhelmshaven, she was driven to Haru-Mersiel with Bruckner, being informed that just before her letter was received, Hitler had been talking about how much he liked her dancing in the Holy Mountain. Riefenstahl would go on to describe Hitler as unexpectedly modest, as the two walked along the beach talking about her films, enjoying even The Blue Light. As Riefenstahl recounts, Hitler suddenly stopped and exclaimed that she must make the films when the Nazis come to power. Following their meeting, Hitler ordered a personal plane to fly Riefenstahl to Hamburg in order for her to make it in time to start filming SOS Iceberg. Upon her arrival, she was seen grasping her copy of Mein Kampf and pictures of Hitler, showing her deep admiration for him. During the filming, Riefenstahl's health deteriorated due to a bladder infection, which removed her from filming for some time, but allowed her to keep in constant correspondence with Hitler. And also at this time, Hitler was exploiting new technology with the help of Joseph Goebbels. Using the combination of new communication technology and the ability to fly, allowed Hitler to travel further. Despite the advantage the Nazi Party had, they fell short of gaining full control with the majority. As a result, political street violence broke out between the Communist and the Nazi Party. The Nazi Party blamed the Marxists for the violence and used that to call for Ordnung, or order. Riefenstahl was absent for much of this time, but there is no possibility that she did not know what was going on. On multiple occasions, she was invited by Hitler to be his guest, once to his own party, and on another occasion to meet Goebbels, where she also met other top Nazi officials like Hermann Göring. Riefenstahl became a staple of the Nazi elite party scene, and during one of her own parties, she had received a phone call. On the 30th of January 1933, Hitler had gained the chancellorship, and Berlin had exploded into fervor, with thousands of Nazi supporters flooding the streets. Following the accession of Hitler to the chancellor's position, SOS Iceberg resumed filming in February, and wouldn't wrap until May. In the meantime, everything seemed renewed under Hitler's guidance. Hitler's charisma had carried him into power, and for those who supported him, it was like a fairy tale ending. Following the Reichstag fire on the 27th of February 1933, 4,000 political prisoners were rounded up and sent to the converted gunpowder factory in Dachau, which began taking in prisoners on the 20th of March. The creation of Dachau was public knowledge, with an announcement made, along with a warning not to approach the camp or risk being shot. Furthermore, the Nazis established a boycott against Jewish goods on the 1st of April, which coincided with the ceremonial opening of Dachau. Julius Streicher was charged with the organization of the boycott in order to ease the pressure building within the Sturmabteilung, or SA, headed by Ernst Röhm. News reached abroad about the violence perpetrated by the Nazis, leading to boycotts in both England and America of Germany-made products. The Nazis' boycott was not as effective as the administration had hoped, but it did put up an incredible front for the world. Riefenstahl would later claim that no one in her family was a member of the Nazi Party, yet on the same day as the boycott, her father joined, becoming member 1,670,383. On the 10th of May, the book burnings began in Berlin and other major centres and universities, in which any book deemed un-German was seized and thrown into massive burn piles. Many notable authors were put to the figurative torch, such as Albert Einstein, Karl Marx, Sigmund Freud, and Helen Keller. Riefenstahl returned to Berlin following the shooting for SOS Iceberg, and immediately pushed Ufer to star her in a movie about a spy in Paris during the Great War. Ufer refused on the grounds of the growing tension in Europe, yet Riefenstahl walked away with the impression she had convinced them of the film. On the 16th of May, she accompanied Goebbels and his wife to a performance of Madame Butterfly, where the press was in a frenzy over her appearance there. Soon after their public appearance, Goebbels was appointed to the newly created Minister of National Enlightenment and Propaganda, a role designed for him. Much of what the Nazis became known for was a result of Goebbels. He worked meticulously behind the scenes, orchestrating the grand display of gestures and actions to show off Germany's youth, strength and vitality. One result of Goebbels' work was the expulsion of Jews from the German film industry, including foreign companies. Major companies such as MGM and Warner Brothers heavily employed Jewish people, which led to a mass exodus from Germany. But not all were lucky, as Joe Kaufman, a Warner Brothers representative, was murdered by the SA. As a result of the crackdown, Riefenstahl created a proof of descent, but lied about who her grandmother was, as she claimed her step-grandmother, Ottilie, as her biological grandmother. This change went unnoticed and unchallenged, allowing Riefenstahl to receive a pass in order to continue her work. Before her next major project, Riefenstahl spent much of her time with Goebbels in meetings, social events, private screenings, and day trips out of Berlin. The elites of the Nazi society would congregate and attend operas. Those who attended included Prince Friedrich Christian of Schaumburg-Lippe and Prince August Wilhelm von Hohenzollern, the son of the exiled Kaiser Wilhelm II, along with Prince Philip of Hesse. She was invited to spend time with Hitler to discuss the Führer's upcoming films. Riefenstahl claims to have pressed Hitler about the flight of the Jewish people and the violence directed towards them, yet Hitler simply brushed her aside and refused to talk about it. Hitler instead redirected the conversation to ask if Riefenstahl would be willing to take over artistic vision for the Hitler film. She at first declined the offer, but as she thought on it, she decided to take the position. They would be two masters of charisma and charm, constantly trying to gain the edge on one another to further their own ambitions. In August of 1933, Riefenstahl was to film the Nazi Party Congress in Nuremberg, which would be the first major rally Hitler would hold since becoming Chancellor of Germany. Riefenstahl had not been told that she was to direct the film, when Hitler exploded with anger towards Goebbels that he must be envious that such an honor was to be given to a woman, let alone someone who was not a card-carrying Nazi Party member. Either way, Riefenstahl was to take part in its creation, but the question remains, was she producing propaganda or political persuasion? While she was not under the direct control of Goebbels, it was her vision that set the precedent, and she decided to try and focus on the relationship between the Führer and his people. The Nazi Party Congress was different from an ordinary rally, as it was a state event which included parades, speeches, and rituals. The rally would be called Reichsparty Rally of Victory, and Hitler would name Riefenstahl's film himself, with the title Victory of Faith. Her position in the Reich sparked envy from the male-dominated industry, as well as constant rumours as to how she attained her position, which she cheerfully encouraged. She openly clashed with the film crew over every aspect of the film, from equipment to manpower, and even external news organisations given access to film. A total of 350,000 people were expected to attend, including regiments from Rome's SA and Heinrich Himmler's SS. Riefenstahl would also meet Albert Speer, Hitler's architect and eventual wartime minister of armaments, who designed the rally's layout. He was a gifted man who once turned a stage set for a provincial shooting match into a ceremonial stage. He helped Riefenstahl by guiding her as to how much film time should be used between the warring factions of the Nazi parties such as Rome, Himmler and Hesse. Riefenstahl and her team started filming early in the day to film a crucial part of Victory of Faith, depicting the Volk, or German people, preparing the benches that would be used for the rally. Hitler loaned Riefenstahl a plane which allowed her to fly to Berlin to be present during the premiere of SOS Iceberg on the 30th of August 1933. It was during this time that the producer, Paul Kohner, noticed that his name was removed from the credit list due to him being Jewish. Following the launch of her film, she returned to Nuremberg to continue filming, but would have to borrow the rest of the film from the news organizations. Victory of Faith premiered on the 1st of December 1933 at the Palast am Zoo, and would eventually be a required film to watch for school children, but would be pulled 7 months after its premiere and ordered destroyed, following the Night of the Long Knives, in which members of SA High Command, including Rome, were accused of treason and executed. Before Victory of Faith was released to the public, Hitler had already seen the value Riefenstahl brought to the image he was trying to make for the future, and insisted she be given the rights to direct the next rally. Although she had been given this honour, she proclaimed she would not film another event for the party, and that her company would hold the sole copyrights to produce the film, though the latter would eventually fall through. Yet major changes would set a different tone in the new film. Triumph of the Will, the first being the death of Paul von Hindenburg on the 2nd of August, and the second being the purge of the SA. Both of these events would drastically change the public's perception of the Nazi Party, and would play a particular role in helping the public forget about the past and focus on the future. The filming of Triumph of the Will used many of the same angles and events as Victory of Faith, but now with Hitler as the centerpiece, as Rome had been removed. Triumph of the Will premiered on the 28th of March 1935 at the Palast am Zoo, where she attended with her parents and brother. The crowd swooned over the film and gave glowing reviews, which even included her rival Goebbels. On May Day, Goebbels awarded the film the National Film Prize of 1935 and described it as glowing with artistic passion. Following the filming of Triumph of the Will, the Wehrmacht demanded a film of their own to show their strength, yet they had been strategically left out, as it wasn't until 2 weeks before the premiere of the film that Hitler had renounced the Treaty of Versailles. Riefenstahl set to work on Day of Freedom, in which he filmed military exercises showing off the military might of Germany. While Riefenstahl decided against filming party events, it did not stop her from taking another opportunity, one that would also be used as propaganda: the 1936 Olympics. Protests continued over Germany's treatment of Jews and their removal of Dr. Theodor Lewald from the Olympic Committee due to his Jewish heritage. The backlash they faced resulted in them installing him as an advisor and an honorary Aryan to quell the unrest. The arrival of the Olympics in Berlin renewed the poor treatment of ethnic minorities and the undesirables, as they were guided away from the tourist attractions in the cities, only to be placed in the concentration camps. Any signs used to deter the Jewish people or other ethnic minorities were removed and hidden. Berlin was to be on its best behaviour, as the world had its eye on her. The Olympics posed a challenge for Riefenstahl, as many times the events were hosted in venues far from her main command post. This required new innovation with camera angles and type of cameras to keep up with the action. For Riefenstahl, every angle had to be covered, which included using planes to capture overhead shots. The Berlin Olympics would be the first Olympics to be televised, a technological feat never attempted before, in part due to Goebbels wanting to showcase Germany's physical prowess to the world. Riefenstahl went over budget during the filming, which made Goebbels freeze her funds. This resulted in her manipulating Hitler into believing that Goebbels had been harassing her, and so Goebbels was removed from command of the Olympia film. Rudolf Hess replaced Goebbels and gave Riefenstahl the funding she needed, allowing her to split the films into two separate projects, one on the body of an Olympian, and the other about the history of the 1936 Olympics, the original goal of the project. Olympia would not be ready until the 20th of April 1938, in time for the Führer's 49th birthday. But when it finally came to the premiere date at the Palast am Zoo, it was an event like no other. Diplomats from around the world attended along with high-ranking Nazi officials. Whilst it was a celebration of Hitler and the Third Reich's achievements, it also highlighted the work of Riefenstahl. London would scoff at the film as propaganda, but she received interest in America and was set to sail to America on the 29th of October on the Europa. Riefenstahl arrived on the 3rd of November after an uneventful voyage, but quickly met resistance from the non-sectarian Anti-Nazi League, claiming she was there to spread Nazi propaganda, which is partially true, but she would hardly agree to their claim. While Riefenstahl was in America, Reinhard Heydrich gave the orders on the 9th of November 1938 to attack Jewish-owned businesses and synagogues in what would infamously be known as Kristallnacht. Riefenstahl claimed to not know what was going on in Germany and was more disgusted by the reaction of Americans than by the events of that night, until she returned home 3 months later to find out it was true and not a lie. She found very little support in America for her film Olympia, except at the California Club, where they showed the movie privately among their members. Her stay was extended by 2 weeks, but there was still no interest in her film, and so she returned home to Berlin. On the 1st of September 1939, Hitler moved his troops into Poland, triggering World War II in Europe. Riefenstahl was devastated at the thought of war, as Hitler had always talked of peace, yet she embraced the conflict by becoming a war correspondent. Riefenstahl received a special unit called the Sonderfilmtrupp Riefenstahl, or the Special Riefenstahl Film Unit, full of the best filmmakers the Third Reich had to offer, who saw action in the Spanish Civil War and the annexation of Austria. On the 12th of September 1939 in the morning while in Konski, Poland, Riefenstahl's tent was shredded by gunfire, and she stated that she hadn't imagined it would be this dangerous. On the same day, Polish partisans killed and mutilated a German officer and 4 soldiers. As a result, German soldiers forced local Poles to dig their graves and were told to not retaliate. Yet the soldiers started to beat the gravediggers, prompting Riefenstahl to yell at them to stop. One of the soldiers yelled and pointed his gun at her, at which point another wartime photographer caught her horrified reaction. As a result, she asked for her grant to be terminated and for her to be allowed to return to Berlin. Instead of returning to Berlin, she met with Hitler in Danzig as they celebrated its capture. She informed Hitler of what she had seen, to which he was supposedly outraged about the event and promised justice. Instead, he passed an amnesty decree, which allowed war crimes to occur. Riefenstahl continued filmmaking and remained autonomous, as Goebbels absorbed nearly all of the major and minor film companies. Riefenstahl began filming Tiefland, but wartime difficulties created setbacks, such as shooting locations being changed. Riefenstahl's film required extras, and to get around the need for permits, she visited Maxklan concentration camp and selected extras from amongst the imprisoned gypsies who would join her to make the film. She would later refute claims that she visited the concentration camp, but multiple people who survived the Holocaust saw her there. They recollected that she was hardly fazed at the condition of the camp, only stating, "I can't take these people like this, they need to be reclothed." The extras were isolated from the rest of the crew, with armed guards being present to prevent them from escaping. Activities were heavily monitored, such as smoking and using the bathroom, all of which mirrored the control of the concentration camps. The film budget was used to cover housing, feeding, and transportation of the extras, and as well as this, payment was to be given, although it was a meagre sum, and was not to be paid to the extras themselves, but to the fund to pay for the upkeep of Maxklan. In total, 23 gypsies were used in the film, with 15 of them being children, some as young as 3 months old. The shooting location changed on the 27th of April 1942, and Riefenstahl took 68 gypsies from the Marzahn camp. Both of these camps would close in May of 1943, with the extras as well as those who remained being sent to Auschwitz, where only a few survived the ordeal. It was during the filming of Tiefland that Riefenstahl met her first true love, Peter Jakob, a first lieutenant in the Wehrmacht. Riefenstahl was 40, while Jakob was 33 and a known womanizer, yet Leni was unfazed by this, as she had also used her looks to climb the social ladder in Germany's film industry. due to Jakob's position in the military, he was constantly being either called to the front or transferred. Leaving Riefenstahl alone for much of the war, Jakob would be promoted to major before their marriage in the spring of 1944 in the town of Kitzbühel, after which she changed her name to Riefenstahl Jakob, and she also visited Hitler following her marriage, but noticed the toll the war had taken on him. On the 16th of July 1944, Riefenstahl rushed to Berlin when she learned her father had died of heart failure. The funeral was arranged for the 20th of July 1944, and Speer promised to be in attendance. During the funeral, Speer was rushed away, as at 12:42 p.m. a bomb had gone off in the Wolf's Lair at Hitler's military headquarters. The coup had been planned by Colonel Klaus von Stauffenberg and other officers, but Hitler survived, and the traitors were executed. Shortly after the failed Operation Valkyrie, Riefenstahl learned her brother Heinz had been killed by a grenade in East Prussia in the town of Lettland. Riefenstahl was devastated at the loss of her father and brother in such quick succession, and regretted not making use of her position of favour with Hitler to have him pulled from the front. She continued filming Tiefland, but as the Allied forces came closer, the deferments from duty her film crew had previously enjoyed were being rescinded, including for Fank, who was well over 50 years old. With filming nearly complete, she used her military connections to locate where Jakob was and headed towards the Italian front, where she found he was bedridden with rheumatism. She attempted to flee into the Alps but was captured by American troops near Kitzbühel. She was put in a detention center, escaping twice before making her way to her home at Seebikel House, which was the American headquarters in the town. The acting commander, Colonel Maidenbach, told Riefenstahl that her mother had been relocated to the Ribbentrop estate and entertained the idea of finding Riefenstahl's husband. Within a day he found him and offered to make him a driver for the colonel, allowing the two to be reunited. Riefenstahl was shortly afterwards taken to Salzburg prison as a result of the denazification process, and lived somewhat comfortably with the likes of Hitler's senior secretary Johanna Wolff and Hermann Göring. She was forced to look at pictures from the concentration camps, but she claimed she had no idea the Holocaust was happening and would reel off the list of her Jewish friends to the point that her list was called the Alibi Jew. She claimed her fame originated before she knew Hitler and Goebbels, and that knowing them was merely an unavoidable professional contact. She also claimed that she only saw other Nazi staff at official celebrations. There was no mention of her wartime activities, and the American interrogators came to the conclusion that, quote, if her statements are sincere, she has never grasped, and still does not grasp, the fact that she, by dedicating her life to art, has given expression to a gruesome regime and contributed to its glorification. Both Riefenstahl and Wolff claimed there was no way Hitler could have known about the Holocaust, and that it was the doing of Himmler, Goebbels and Bormann. Many described Riefenstahl as a Nazi for Hitler, not for the party, trying to distinguish the two. But the fact of the matter is, Hitler was the Nazi party. On the 6th of June 1945, Riefenstahl was released by the 7th Army and allowed to return to her home in Kitzbühel, along with her staff, allowing her to finish Tiefland. Colonel Maidenbach recommended she move to the American zone of occupation, as the French were going to take over. Jakob left with Maidenbach, but Riefenstahl did not, which was a mistake. The French detained her and transferred her to Innsbruck, where they interrogated her and determined she was undesirable, giving her 24 hours to leave the French zone. Riefenstahl called Jakob and Maidenbach to help her pack, but they were late due to a car accident that Maidenbach was injured in. By the time the two men arrived, they only had time to pack the essentials, leaving Tiefland behind. They were stopped by French authorities and driven to Innsbruck, where Riefenstahl was put in the prison hospital due to a bladder infection. She recovered and with the help of Maidenbach was allowed her travel documents as well as French protection, but in reality, she was under house arrest. The French confiscated her bank account, along with most of her films, including Tiefland. She was once again labelled undesirable and forced from the French zone, arriving eventually in Breisach. She would file for divorce from Jakob when she heard of his infidelities in May of 1947. After the war, Riefenstahl battled multiple lawsuits for her part in the Holocaust, most of which she won, denying any and all allegations of cooperating with the Nazis. During her denazification, the evidence brought against her was limited, and both party members and non-party members testified how she was not politically active with the Nazis. The judicial panel, many of whom had been judges on the Nazi bench, came to the following determination concerning Riefenstahl. She made documentaries, not propaganda. She was coerced by Hitler into making Triumph of the Will. She was not responsible for uses the party made of her work. Olympia was an international project that had nothing to do with the party. She had many Jewish friends but no party associations beyond the professional, and she did not require her employees to greet her with the Hitler salute. The final decisive factor was that Riefenstahl had never been an official party member, the only thing saving her from a prison sentence. The French protested the hearing and appealed against it, and a second tribunal was conducted in July 1949 in Baden. Riefenstahl was taken to court one more time and found not guilty, though Riefenstahl played dumb and pretended once again to know nothing about the atrocities of the Nazi regime. All of her previous films were made to enhance the party's appearance and encourage people to join, and even when she witnessed the atrocities at the beginning of the war, she only spoke to Hitler about it and never bothered with it again. She used those who the Nazis deemed undesirables as cheap replacements for the Greek and Italians she was looking to portray to avoid the longer processes of applying for permits. Riefenstahl benefited from the Nazi regime, and she was hardly the victim she portrayed. Many of Riefenstahl's works were banned in post-war Germany, as imagery of the swastika was banned. She attempted to get back into filmmaking with little success. The only film left for her was Tiefland, but it was tied up in a mess of a court case, as the authorities had to determine who owned the film, which was seized by the French on Austrian soil. Riefenstahl filed a claim with the Bavarian Restitution Office and asserted that the film was hers, and no Nazi finances were used. The Austrians released the film to Riefenstahl in early 1953, but she soon discovered 4 film reels missing, and despite her searching, she failed to find them. Tiefland premiered in Stuttgart on the 11th of February 1954 with mixed reviews. The Association of Survivors of Concentration Camps decided to boycott the film for its use of slave labor. In 1962, Riefenstahl went to Africa as part of the Nansen expedition to Khartoum in Sudan to record the Nuba people and how progress would affect their way of life. For Riefenstahl, it was about exploring the human body along with the rituals of tribal dancing, wrestling, body tattoos, and funerals. Though Riefenstahl's methods were deemed intrusive, which resulted in slight hostility, Riefenstahl eventually learned enough of the language to speak with the Nuba people. She would go on to publish a photography book about the Nuba people in 1974 and travelled between Germany and Sudan for nearly 30 years. When the Second Sudanese Civil War broke out in 2000, Riefenstahl went to find out the fate of her Nuba friends, but her helicopter crashed, although she miraculously survived the ordeal. Riefenstahl celebrated her 101st birthday on the 22nd of August 2003 on Lake Starnberg in Bavaria, yet shortly after this she fell ill. Having already been battling cancer, Riefenstahl died at 10 p.m. on the 8th of September 2003 in her home at Peking, Germany. Her death inspired mixed emotions, as those who survived the Holocaust still saw her as the woman who got away. Riefenstahl pioneered many artistic film techniques. One of her most well-known was making the viewer feel as though they were physically inside the subject's mind, making connections by focusing on the eyes of the subject before switching to the people being addressed. Despite these accomplishments, however, she was manipulative, selfish, and unapologetic. This manipulative behavior allowed her to profit from the Holocaust, and when Germany was finally defeated, she manipulated the people who put her on trial to allow her to get away. What do you think of Leni Riefenstahl? Was she an artist who was held hostage by the Nazi Party, or was she complicit in the Third Reich's propaganda regime, having produced some of its most iconic films? Please let us know in the comments section. And in the meantime, thank you very much for watching.